On today's show, Donovan Mitchell should have some power when it comes to who the next head coach of the Cavs is. I'll tell you why.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can help grow the show. Listen every day. Subscribe on wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, somewhere else. Watch the show on YouTube. We are free and available everywhere you get your podcasts. YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Terms and conditions apply. The Cleveland Cavaliers are now more than 2 weeks into their search for a new head coach. We know they fired former head coach J.B. Bickerstaff last month in May. It's been more than 2 weeks since then. A handful of different names have come out as far as guys go that the team has requested permission to interview. Guys that work for other teams. We know the names, right? Kenny Atkinson's been a hot name. James Borrego has been a hot name that I certainly think we will be hearing more about in the coming days. Chris Quinn, certainly a hot name. Johnny Bryant, a hot name. Micah Nori, a hot name. So there have been a lot of names, and of course there are other people too that have been involved in this, but there have been a lot of names that have been thrown around here. And one of the things that often gets brought up, and this is not a Cavs specific thing, this is an NBA thing. One of the things that gets brought up when you're talking about who teams should hire when they're in the position to hire a head coach, particularly when they're in the position that the Cavs are in right now, where the Cavs are not in a rebuild. The Cavs are in a position where they're hoping that this head coach that they hire, whenever they make this hire, is going to be someone that pushes them forward into a more competitive space, right? It's not someone that you're looking to start a rebuild with. It's not someone that you're hoping to go from bad to good with. It's someone that the Cavs are hoping can take them from good to great, which to me, and I don't know that this gets talked about enough, but to me, going from good to great is probably the toughest jump to take in the NBA. We can see teams go from bad to good or bad to average, but going from good to great is really, really difficult. And that's the point where the Cavs are at. And one of the reasons they're at that point is because the play of Donovan Mitchell has been so good since he's been on the Cavs for the past 2 seasons. And when a team in this position goes through a coaching change, so often the conversation is, well, how much power should the star player have in selecting the new coach, right? We hear about this right now with the Los Angeles Lakers and LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And I think we hear about it a little bit less, but still some with the Cavs and Donovan Mitchell. And part of the reason why we don't hear about it a ton with Donovan is because his situation certainly is a little cloudy, I think it's fair to say, as far as if he's going to be on the Cavs next year or if he's going to not sign an extension. My money is still on him signing that extension with the Cavaliers and being in Cleveland for the foreseeable future. But I want to talk about just how much someone in his position should have sway over an organization when they are making this sort of head coaching hire. And I don't think that this is as simple as, well, who does Donovan Mitchell want the Cavs to hire? That's who they should go out and get. I don't think that's what this is. And I don't think that's what this should be. And I also think that we're at the point in the NBA, maybe we were at a different point a few years back, but I think we're at the point in the NBA where guys don't necessarily want that because they start to be viewed as, you know, if it doesn't work out, it's their fault. We just saw this year with what happened with the Milwaukee Bucks, where Giannis Antetokounmpo wanted a certain coach. Adrian Griffin was hired. Very clearly did not work out for the Bucks and for Griffin. They move on from him mid-season. Giannis is the one that gets blamed there. And part of that's fair. You know, he reportedly, allegedly is the guy that Giannis wanted. I don't think that those situations are very commonplace in the NBA anymore. I do believe that we're at the point now where stars want to distance themselves a little bit from certain decisions that organizations make because they don't want to take the fall if that decision goes poorly. And I totally get that. And that's how I think it should be, because this is an organizational decision. With that said, I do think that there should be some input. If the Cavs get to a certain point in their progress, right? Like say they have it narrowed down to two guys. They have two candidates that they really like, that they're between, that they don't know who to go with. It's not as if they're going to ask the star player, in this case Donovan Mitchell, to be the tiebreaker, but they can certainly ask for input. Or if the Cavs are at a point where, you know, maybe there's a certain coach that they really like, that this is the guy they want to hire. One of the steps, I believe, towards the end of that process should be, well, let's have this coaching candidate X meet with Donovan Mitchell. And let's see how those two, how their personalities mesh, how their ideas around basketball fit together. I do think that's a very fair thing to have as part of the conversation. And I think organizations would be smart to do that. So I don't think that when you sit here, it's, oh, let Donovan Mitchell pick who he wants to be the next head coach of the Cavs. I think that would be foolish. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I also think that he is at the point in his career now, and certainly at the talent level across the NBA, where teams, and in this case the Cavs, should go to him and say, hey, this is where we're at with this. We would love for you to have a meeting with said coach and see where it goes. And then that is part of the decision-making process on the organization's, you know, that's part of the organization's process. Because if that sort of meeting goes great, I don't want to say your decision is made, but it makes that decision easier to make, right? And the same thing if that decision goes poorly. If that meeting isn't good, if that meeting goes poorly, I should say, you know, that decision becomes tougher. But ultimately, because this is such a star-driven league, and having stars matters so much in today's NBA, that it's something that you have to take into account. You have to take into account how stars feel about certain coaches. Again, I don't think it's the be-all, end-all. It's not the entire decision. I think it's foolish if an organization makes a decision on a head coach based on the opinion of one player. I think that's very, very foolish. But the Cavaliers have a player right now in Donovan Mitchell who I expect to be around, that they should ask for input on these sorts of things. I think that the best way to do that is when the process is nearing its end. And we're at, you know, it is June 10th today. We're at the point where we've got to be getting a little bit closer. Where the Cavs have had a little over 2 weeks at this point. I know Cavs president of basketball operations, when Kobe Altman, when he had his end of season availability, talked about wanting to take the weekend that was Memorial Day weekend and then regroup. So it'll be 2 weeks from Memorial Day is today. So we're at that point where progress has to have been made there. I think that's a fair assumption to make. And as we get deeper into this process, I think that's when you start to ask the opinion of, and it's not just Donovan Mitchell. It might be Evan Mobley too. It could be Darius Garland. Maybe it's Jarrett Allen. I think Donovan's the easiest one there because he is really the biggest, I think, pivot point in the NBA this summer, as far as so many things across the league are going to be, I don't want to say held up for what he decides to do, but I think that there's a lot of the league that's going to just move maybe in a little bit of slow motion until we get an update on Donovan's status. And with him being that type of player, I think asking for input and trying to set up a meeting between him and a potential head coach would be something that's really smart for the organization to do. And I think if the organization isn't planning on doing that, that is something that I think could be looked at as a mistake. Because ultimately, the goal, yes, winning is the goal here, right? The Cavs want to be the best version of the Cavs possible. That's what the goal should be. But how do you get that goal? How do you reach that goal? How is that attainable? Well, it's attainable by having Donovan Mitchell on the roster. And I think the chances of Donovan Mitchell being on the roster, we could all agree, are better if the coach that's hired, whoever that is someone that's going to fit in well, not just with this organization, not just with this roster, really, but with Mitchell as a whole. I think it's something that it is very important to keep in mind as this process is moving along. That's a very important thing with it. I've got a list of other very important things that I think the Cavs need to keep in mind as they start to near closer to the end of this coaching search. The coaching search is coming to a close at some point soon. With every day that passes, we are closer to the Cavs having a new head coach. We don't know who it is yet, but we're getting closer. And I will tell you some of the things that I think are really important to be thinking about as this process continues on. I will tell you about that next. But today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Love peak performance. I mean, if your vehicle is not at peak performance, what are you doing? Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights. Love a good LED headlight, and so much more. Or, whether you're in speed, power, style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you are looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time. Or if it doesn't, your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only, available to U.S. customers. So, among the things that I think are really important for the Cavaliers to consider as they are searching for this new head coach, the thing that I think, and I'm really encouraged by what a lot of their list has looked like as you go through this, the number one priority for me has to be, what do things look like, or for this coach in particular, whoever it is, what have things looked like on the offensive side of the court throughout his time in the NBA? Because what we've seen, and I think that what JB Bickerstaff did while in Cleveland, one of the best things he did was he built a really great defense. And it's really difficult to get a young team, especially the way that the Cavs were, particularly in that 2021-22 season they made the play-in. It's really difficult to get a young team to play good defense, and Bickerstaff achieved that, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. With that being said, I think that there are a lot of pieces on this roster that are really good defensively. When you talk about a Jarrett Allen, and of course, some of this is subject to change, but you talk about a Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley, who's already been a Defensive Player of the Year finalist. Isaac Okoro, I think, is a very, very good defender. Max Strus, a very capable defender. Dean Wade, a very good defender. You have a lot of guys that are good defenders. And then even, Donovan Mitchell has been better than I thought he would be defensively. Darius Garland is not great defensively, but he's not one of the worst defenders in basketball either. I think that the bones, kind of no matter who is hired at this point, the bones of a really good defense are there. So for me, that means seeing a coach that is really good offensively is a priority, because I just don't think there's as much work that needs to be done on the defensive side of the basketball. Does that make sense? Where, if you have a really good defense already, the offense is what needs to improve. And that's why I think going with someone who has a track record of being able to put together really good offenses, particularly guard-oriented offenses, because the Cavs are a team that I do believe is going to be, while Evan Mobley, I still have a lot of stock in and think he's going to be awesome. We'll talk about him coming up in just a second. But I think that the Cavs are going to continue to be a very guard-dominant, guard-oriented team. Even if both Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell aren't together next year, one of them will be. And they're going to be a team that the guards are going to take them as far as they can go offensively. So hiring a coach that has done that before on that side of the court, to where they've had some really good offenses that have been run by guards, that's something that I think is very, very important to keep in mind as you do this. For this, I look at James Borrego, to where what he was able to accomplish with, one, early in his tenure in Charlotte, Kemba Walker, who is, I don't think he fits stylistically either of the guards the Cavs have right now as a basketball player, but similar size, and that matters to me. And then later on in his Charlotte tenure, a younger LaMelo Ball. And I think that putting together a good offense with a rookie point guard, and I don't love LaMelo's game. I think he's a little more flash than substance. I think he's sort of overrated, but putting together a good offense that was sort of centered around him as such a young player and getting the most out of that, I think is a really good thing. So I do wonder, okay, how good can that look if there's a more established guy in the backcourt that can do that sort of stuff? How much better is that going to be if that's the case? And James Borrego, I look at him there. I look at Kenny Atkinson. I think that particularly with what he did prior to the arrival of Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and that circus that came into Brooklyn when those two did, you look at what that offense looked like when Karis LeVert was part of it, D'Angelo Russell, a very, very young and inexperienced D'Angelo Russell were part of it. That's a really good sign. Those are things that I look for when I'm talking about a coaching search, or these qualities that I'd like to see. And the offensive philosophy, offensive side of the basketball is absolutely up there, but it's more about just having good offenses, because you can have good offenses and you rely upon a 6'8", 6'9" wing guy that's awesome. Right now, the Cavs don't have one of those. Right now, the Cavs have a lot of firepower in the backcourt, so it's about, is there someone out there? Is there someone that you think fits that has done that? Not maybe with two guards, but at least with one guard, having a guard-centered offense. That's something that I think is very, very important to keep in mind. And one of the things that I take into mind when I'm, ranking, putting together this big board of candidates that we'll get to a little bit later on in the show. Up next for me, another very important thing is player development. Because, and this has been a really tough thing to balance, and I talked about this a little bit last week. It's been a really tough thing to balance. But Evan Mobley has played almost every basketball game of his career. Every basketball game of his NBA career has mattered for something. The Cavs haven't been a tanking team with Mobley on the roster. Their tank finished the day they selected him. They were above 500 his rookie year. They won 51 games his second year. They won however many games this year. I think it was 48 games this year. They've been a winning team. They've had home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs each of the last 2 years. When you are balancing that sort of thing, which the Cavs obviously were, and also trying to develop a top 3 pick, which the Cavs have been trying to do, it's a really difficult thing to do. It's a very tough needle to thread. And the Cavs have, on the defensive side of the basketball, it's been perfect. Offensively, I think there's still more that can be tapped into with Mobley. So how much can a new coach get out of him? And when I talk about player development, I am talking almost exclusively about Evan Mobley. Maybe a little bit about Isaac Okoro too, but almost exclusively about Evan Mobley, because I think he's the guy that he has the highest ceiling. And I think part of this was when they traded for Donovan Mitchell, that was sort of a bet on Evan Mobley becoming the team's best player. That's sort of the way that I viewed it. But Donovan has been so good, and I think better than expectations, to where he's been, while healthy, a top 10 player in basketball in each of the last 2 seasons. Like, that is what he has been. So that I think has just sort of recalibrated expectations a little bit, or even recalibrated that bet a little bit that the Cavs made with that trade. But that doesn't mean that Mobley's ceiling still isn't as high as it once was. That's why it's so important for this next head coaching hire to be someone that can help to tap into that. That can help to really get the most out of Evan, particularly on the offensive floor. We know he's a great defender. We know that. But getting him to be a better offensive player is something that I do think matters a lot. When you start to think about coaching candidates, those are two of the biggest things. I've got two more that I will tell you coming up, as well as my coaching big board, where we're at almost a power rankings of sort, because I think we're getting closer to some sort of decision being made. So I'm going to give my power rankings as far as where I've got guys who I think is the best fit. And, I've just continuing to do more and more research with this sort of stuff. So I've got my big board, my power rankings of coaches, as long as two more things that I think are very important coming up next. But when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. When I've looked for jobs, and I have looked for jobs before, this isn't my first job, I've gone to LinkedIn Jobs. So if you're out there, if you're hiring right now and you're looking for people like me, I hope you are looking for people like me. I think I'm not a bad guy. Go to LinkedIn Jobs because you'll find people like me there. And I know that, and I can say that because I've used LinkedIn Jobs before to find jobs. LinkedIn, it's not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals. It's billion with a B. It's a lot of professionals, and that makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you cannot find anywhere else. These people aren't on other job boards. They're on LinkedIn Jobs, and LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. That is super efficient. So go to LinkedIn Jobs, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba. LOCKEDONNBA. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So the last two things that I had on my list here of qualities that I'm searching for, winning background is up next, because as I mentioned, the Cavs are trying to take that jump from good to great, which is a very, very difficult jump to take in the NBA. It's a big challenge. It's much more difficult to do than going from, average to good, or bad to average, or even bad to good, as we saw the Cavs in, 2021 to 2022. They went from bad to, good, above average at the very least. And that's a difficult jump to make. But the jump from what they've been the last 2 years to what they aspire to be next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and so on and so forth, is a more difficult jump to make. It's really hard to be great in the NBA. And it's sort of a weird thing, because in Cleveland, around this team, we don't necessarily know what it's like just to be good. It's either been really bad on this end or really good on this end, like great on this end of the spectrum with LeBron. So I do think that it's an interesting process for fans to watch. Like it's a really interesting process to see up close, but having someone that has experience in a winning culture could be a big boost there. It really could be a big boost there. And then the other quality that I have, because the Cavs are at a point where, they've got a superstar in Donovan Mitchell. What's your history like handling stars? What stars have you been around? How has that gone in those experiences? What's that been like? These two things aren't everything. Like, I think that I've sort of gone in order of, I think, what matters the most. But this is something that matters. Like, I like Kenny Atkinson as a coaching candidate a lot. But the way that things ended in Brooklyn give me a little bit of pause. And I think that's fair. And I understand that situation, sort of abnormal. A lot was crazy, especially in the world at that time. But it's something that sticks with me just a little bit. Just a little bit. And to be fair, since then, he's been around stars. He's been in Golden State. He's been with the Clippers. He's been around stars. but that experience sticks with me just a little bit. So those are the last two things. As far as my coaching big board or my coaching power rankings, my top two guys right now are still Kenny Atkinson, and I think James Borrego is number 2 or maybe number 1 for me right now. I've done more digging into just how those Charlotte teams looked offensively, and I do think that that is something that it could be. Now, my question with it is, okay, yeah, those Charlotte teams look good offensively, but they weren't on playoff teams. You know, they did not play very much defense. How much of that was Borrego? How much of that was the roster? Like, there's a lot to unpack when you're considering it. But I do think that offensively, he's one of the better minds in basketball. And that is something that I have to say is a little bit more appealing, or at least maybe I'm more educated on it right now than I was at the start of this whole candidacy, or this whole coaching search, I guess I should say. But seeing how bright of a basketball mind, particularly offensively, that he is something that I do think. And, you know, I went through this. I put offense at number 1 on my list. And that, for Borrego, brings me a lot of... That makes me excited about him as a potential coaching candidate, right? Because that offense and what they were able to do, particularly with LaMelo Ball when he was really young, okay, if they can do that with a guard that's still very much finding his footing in the NBA, what's Borrego capable of doing with a guard that is an all-NBA caliber player? That's someone that has found himself in the last 2 years on MVP ballots. What could that offense look like? And that's a really fun thing I do think to think about. So I would have him next. I would then probably go Chris Quinn and Johnny Bryant in that same sort of second tier, if you will. You know, from things I've heard, Johnny Bryant is ready to be a head coach in the NBA. Like, this isn't just Donovan Mitchell loves him, so he's a candidate because of that. Like, I've talked to people that have told me that they think Johnny Bryant is ready for this type of opportunity. It's not just he's only getting an interview because of Donovan Mitchell. Like, that's not something that's true. And then with Chris Quinn, you know, we really haven't heard a ton about him lately, really since Adrian Wojnarowski reported that the Cavs received permission to interview him. But I do think that there's something to that Heat culture stuff. I don't think it's everything. I don't think it's the whole thing, but I think it's something. And I just think that's worth noting, and that would put it on there for me. Mike Inori is probably next. Having some experience on the sideline, I do like that. I like that he's got experience working in a system that employs 2, sometimes 3 big guys in the floor in Minnesota when you talk about Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, Naz Reid. So I do think that those are certainly pluses for him as well. We've got to be getting closer to this. We're at now over 2 weeks since JB Bickerstaff was fired. So with every day that passes, we are closer to getting a new head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. You're going to want to keep it locked on right here to Locked On Cavs. We'll be coming at you each and every day. We'll be your first listen every day as we go through this coaching search, as the draft approaches. Going to do some draft stuff later on this week, as the NBA draft is, you know, just over 2 weeks away. Cavs have the number 20 overall pick, so we will get into that coming up a little bit later on this week, and certainly next week as well, as the draft gets closer, and then obviously free agency. But very much appreciate you listening today. Give us a 5-star review, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, subscribe on Spotify, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Like the show on YouTube, subscribe to the Locked On Cavs YouTube channel. All of that stuff is how you help us grow the show, which is what we want to do. We have a lot of really big plans here at Locked On Cavs. Super excited to be talking to you guys at least 5 days a week. Your first listen every day. Again, Locked On Cavs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Danny Cunningham. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I will talk to you again tomorrow.